a breakup, especially if it was a meaningful relationship or a long relationship, or you went super deep with each other, a breakup is going to touch those wounds in a very similar way, and it is going to feel like death. I think we've all had that experience of relationships feeling like death because, of course, they are a kind of death, but they're also a way to sort of reignite the deep wounds of our childhood that may have been dormant for years. Welcome back to the Embodied Relationship Experience. My name is John Wineland. I am your host today. Today we're going to talk about the beauty and wisdom of breakups and how breakups can be portals into our deepest growth and our deepest elevation and evolution. And while it's true that breakups can be incredibly destabilizing, heartbreaking, even debilitating in some ways, they do provide us with so much information and so much that we can work on in order to deepen as human beings, in order to course correct in how we relate, and ultimately how we can become better and more artful lovers and partners. Today, I'm going to discuss why breakups are so painful, what we can do in order to more consciously end a relationship and more lovingly and artfully end a relationship, and then how we can take what we've learned in our last relationship and create a new template and a new depth of healing in ourselves. So I invite you to strap in. We're going to get deep into it. I know that everybody, almost everybody, has had the experience of having their heart broken, a love that they had high hopes for, didn't work out, and oftentimes they are left kind of confused and stranded and a bit lost in life, knowing what to do in order to move into the next relationship. And I'm going to lay out today some practices and some explorations that will not only help you end relationships consciously, but also give you some tools on how to evaluate yourself, more than your partner, but yourself, and how that evaluation can really help elevate your relating in the next go-round. But before we dive in, I have a couple pieces of business. If you are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It helps us get the content out. Please leave a comment, leave a question, any thoughts you might have, or anything that you would want me to dive deeper into. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or any other podcast format, please leave a review, rate and review it. It really helps us get the content out there. Also, we've just launched the Embodied Men's Leadership Training Program. Enrollment is starting now and it goes through the end of the year. And the program is a 6-month program that starts in January. It is the sort of pinnacle of men's work. Everything that I wrote about in From the Core and all of the men's work I've done over the last 20 years gets concentrated into this program that is really about how to artfully own and embody and transmit a deep and trustable masculine leadership. So if you're a man watching this, or you know a man who may benefit from being in such a beautiful brotherhood, there's usually 60 to 70 guys. We sell this program out every year, and it's really one of the most beautiful and deepest experiences of the year for me every year. So if you're interested, there's a link below and you can learn more. So I want to start with the questions of why do relationships end and why are they so painful when they do end? And the first thing to note is that, relationships end usually because of one or two or both of these reasons. The first is that your partner was looking for something that you could not provide. It's really that simple. And I'll get deeper into the difference between why a feminine identified partner versus a masculine identified partner might choose to leave the relationship. But it's just important to know that there was something missing. There was something that they were looking for that they just did not trust that you would be able to provide. And because we are no longer tied to our relationships the way our forefathers were, where, staying married was also a matter of survival, but now we have so many choices and so many options. If we feel that our partners are not meeting us, if we feel that our partners are not elevating or expanding or growing to meet us, then we will often leave. Now, if your partner is a masculine identified partner, he is usually feeling malnourished in the form of receiving certain kinds of energy from you. So where the masculine is really fed in relationship is that there are certain types of devotional energy, sexual energy, playful energy. There's certain energetic signatures that he's looking for from his feminine partner that he may not have gotten from you. Now, I'm not saying that this is your fault by any means, but it's just really good to know and to be really clear that the masculine, when the masculine is receiving the kinds of energy that light him up, that nourish his heart and his body, that support his mission on the planet, chances are he will fight to stay. So sometimes the really tough question to ask if you are a feminine identified being whose masculine partner has decided to leave the relationship, there's some really important questions to ask yourself about the kind of energy you were bringing into the relationship and if it was the kind of energy that truly nourished him. For example, if you are a working mother, for example, and you have you're basically managing the house and you're managing a business and you've got this sort of mogul thing going on, right? That is not the kind of energy that will nourish him, enliven him, support him. So it's not that you have to drop any of those things, but what I constantly see women struggling with is how do I add the energy that is nourishing, the devotional energy, the playful energy, the erotic energy. How do I bring that into the field so that my masculine partner feels nourished and feels fed, feels taken care of? Because it's a hard truth, but when you're not getting the nourishment that you need from a relationship, you will begin to look elsewhere. So a good practice will be to take inventory, take stock, and we'll go into a number of different ways to take stock of the kind of energy that you were bringing into a relationship. I had this experience myself where I was in a 7-year relationship, and the first 3 years of the relationship, we were really in sync. And there was she had her own career, I had my own career, but she was able to bring all kinds of really beautiful, wild, devotional, incredible energy. She was, a really beautiful stepmother to my daughter, and she was able to bring the energy that just made me so happy to be in the relationship. Well, she then started a business, and that business literally took her, out of the energy that we had been in for about 3 years and firmly placed her into the position of mogul. She was opening yoga studios and she was traveling around the world, and she became a sort of a mogul of yoga. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it literally took away from the energy that fed us and fed me. And so I became, less satisfied with the relationship. We tried for, another 3 or 4 years to find ways to make it work. But ultimately, it was more important for her to be in the position of driving her purpose forward, which was totally within her right, but it made the relationship less nourishing to me. So I tried for many years to find a way to make it work, and it ultimately didn't, and it led to the end of our relationship. And, David, my teacher, David Data, has spoken about this as sort of a way of, when a feminine partner, for example, has to live in the more masculine driven work of business and of driving and of goal setting and of getting shit done, that will often reflect in the relationship because she's basically living in her masculine most of the day. And unless there is some kind of artful transition into a more feminine energy, her masculine partner will feel a bit neglected and a bit malnourished. Right. And so before you go on and say, well, it should be his duty to support her purpose, I agree with that. But we have to be really honest with ourselves about the kinds of energy and or direction and or leadership and or nourishment that we're bringing into the relationship. And what is the impact if you put yourself in your partner's shoes? And I'm speaking primarily to the feminine here. If you put yourself in your masculine partner's shoes, imagining what kind of energy truly lights him up, truly feeds his heart, truly makes him feel grateful to be alive, and you're not bringing that on a daily basis, or at least, multiple times a week, it would make sense that he's going to feel malnourished and ultimately want to find somebody who will give him that type of nourishment, that type of energy. If you are a masculine identified being whose feminine partner has left the relationship or has chosen to leave the relationship, it's usually because she has lost trust in your capacity to lead her into a place where she feels absolutely safe and cared for and cherished. Right? She has lost trust in you and your ability to lead her into a deeper part of her heart, into a deeper place in her life, to lead her emotionally, to lead her sexually, to lead her into these places of her heart where she feels completely cared for and she can trust you with her body, heart, and soul. A perfect example of this is when men lose their capacity to stay grounded and present in the midst of, feminine upset, feminine storm. I've certainly had that experience. And sometimes it just is impossible to stay fully grounded and fully open and spacious in the midst of your feminine partner's complaints and or wounds and or any other thing, right? But oftentimes what I will see happen is that when men lose their capacity or they don't have the capacity to really hold what women would say, hold all of me, then she loses trust in you. She loses trust in your ability to actually hold her and lead the relationship into a place of harmony, of repair, of safety, of trust. And so oftentimes she will start to lose trust. And when the feminine partner loses trust, she tends to lose attraction and she tends to lose respect. And, I've certainly been on the other side of that myself. I'm a pretty fiery human. So it's a really important and difficult reflection for a man to take, to be like, wow, where did my reactivity and my inability to stay grounded, present, and really lead us into trust and repair, where did that lead to her needing to distance herself from the relationship? So that's one very important exploration that you can have as a masculine partner when your feminine partner is losing trust and ultimately losing attraction. Another example is when a masculine partner does not get the capacity to lead his feminine partner sexually. And when I say lead, I'm not saying dominate and basically direct everything. What I'm saying is that his capacity to penetrate her heart in a deep way so that she feels safe enough to open completely for him and for love and for the relationship, if he hasn't cultivated the capacity to bring heartfelt dark energy, for example, if he hasn't cultivated the capacity to make sex artful, and he hasn't developed the capacity for a deep, trustable presence, then what will happen is that the feminine partner will often lose trust, will be unsatisfied sexually. I see this all the time. because she is looking to be taken deeper. She's looking to go deeper than you're taking her. And therefore, she will lose trust in your capacity to do that and will ultimately lose attraction and may very well end the relationship. So those are a couple examples of what I've seen happen in relationships when masculine partners can't bring a grounded, deep, non-reactive presence to conflict. And when a masculine partner can't actually take or meet his feminine partner sexually and take her deeper than she could take herself. I mean, it makes sense that that she is looking for you to take her deeper into her heart and into her body and into her pleasure than she could take herself. Why else would she need you? So it really comes back to this question that I brought up a few podcasts ago about where is your value? And relationships will often end when there is not a deep exchange of value back and forth. And so oftentimes we get entitled. We get entitled and we think that just because we're a good human or we're a great person or we've been supporting somebody or we've been, with somebody for a long time, that our value is should already be accounted for. But that's not the truth in what tends to happen in relationships. The question of, am I bringing value and how am I bringing value to the relationship becomes incredibly important because it starts to occur as malnourishment to one or the other partners. So this question of where am I valuable and am I bringing a deep value to my partner's life, to her or his life sexually, to her or his life emotionally? Am I bringing the value that actually makes them, elevates them, makes them a better person? Now, of course, there are other reasons why relationships end, and oftentimes those reasons have to do with unexamined childhood wounds. And so what will tend to happen is that when partners come into conflict, usually, as I've said before, and has, fill in the blank on any therapist worth their salt will tell you that your conflicts in your romantic relationships are literally the byproducts and are directly linked to your childhood wounds. And so what will happen oftentimes is that couples will enter into this space of conflict, and one or both of them will refuse to do the deep, hard work that is required in order to heal those wounds so that they don't taint the relationship. They don't infect the relationship. They don't sabotage the relationship. So oftentimes what I will see is that one or the other of a partnership is unwilling to look at their stuff and look at their patterns and how their patterns are impacting the relationship. And when that happens, couples will stay stuck in what's called the power struggle, right? Which usually comes in somewhere between 6 months and 2 years into a relationship as you're starting to get more and more committed to each other, as you're starting to intertwine your lives together, as you're starting to become family, so to speak, right? So the more we become family, the more our childhood wounds will just kind of waft up into our relationship and start to cause problems. This isn't an issue if we look at them. It isn't an issue if we get help and we start to really investigate and unpack the way that our childhood wounds are impacting our relationships. But that is a very tough thing for a lot of people to look at. Many people do not want to look at that. Many people do not want to do the hard work. And so they just assume that there'll be somebody next or somebody down the road that will make it easier. And maybe that's true. There might be, a better partner for them, or there might be a better partner for you if you're watching this and you're in the power struggle wondering. But more often than not, those unexamined wounds will come up in the same way in the next relationship, and they'll be left to deal with them then. So it's really important, and we'll go through how to unpack these things after a breakup and how to really get, ruthlessly honest with yourself about what happened, this sort of relationship post-mortem that is so crucial to our growth and so crucial to our development as humans. Another reason why relationships end is that our needs are not getting met. Oftentimes it's our emotional needs. Sometimes it's our energetic needs, as I've spoken about before, or our sexual needs, right? But at some point, if our needs go unmet for long periods of time and our partners cannot meet our needs, we will eventually seek relationship elsewhere. We will want to go to a place where our needs will get met. And so oftentimes this idea of our emotional needs getting met, there's usually a process that successful relationships go through that relationships that are ending do not. And oftentimes when you're in a healthy relationship, the needs conversation goes something like this. I have a need for you not to call me names, right? I have a need for us to be respectful and to repair quickly, right? That's one of my needs, right? One of my needs is repair. And so if my partner is unwilling or unable, sometimes your partners are willing to meet that need, but when push comes to shove, their nervous system will just not allow them to. So oftentimes when we present needs to our partners, there's usually two questions. One, are they willing? Because if they're not willing, we're kind of screwed. But two, are they willing and able? That willing and able piece is truly important. And so when relationships will end, it's because usually one of the partners or both of the partners are unwilling or unable to meet the other one's needs. So a need for repair, for example, a need for there to be no yelling, for example, right? Maybe somebody grew up in a really violent household and any kind of yelling is very sensitive to them. And so whatever your needs are, they're all valid. But the question to ask is, do they want to meet them? And can they meet them? And oftentimes when relationships end, it's because we are expecting our partners to meet needs that they literally cannot meet. Because if they loved us, we think if they loved us, they would meet them. But that's not the whole story. Sometimes the story is they love us, they want to meet these needs, but they literally do not know how, or they literally cannot will their nervous system because of their childhood wounds to do that. And so that is oftentimes the way that relationships will end, in this conversation around, hey, I really want to meet your needs, I just can't. And then we are stuck in this space of asking our partners to do something that they just can't do. And that is often the reason why relationships will end. So why does it hurt so much when we break up with a loved one? I think that, beyond just missing them, right, and missing their good qualities, missing their bodies, missing the way they smelled, missing the good times and the fun that you have, there are much deeper things going on in your subconscious and in your triune brain, right, your primal brain. Because our partners occupy the same space that our caregivers did, our good old mom and dad did, when there is an end of a relationship, it touches those same wounds of abandonment, of rejection, of neglect that many of us experienced in our childhoods. So a breakup, especially if it was a meaningful relationship or a long relationship, or you went super deep with each other, a breakup is going to touch those wounds in a very similar way, and it is going to feel like death. I think we've all had that experience of relationships feeling like death, because of course they are a kind of death, but they're also a way to sort of reignite the deep wounds of our childhood that may have been dormant for years. Another reason why relationship breakups can be so painful is because oftentimes there was unresolved issues. One partner or the other didn't feel seen and heard. One partner or the other felt betrayed. One partner or the other felt mistreated, right? And those unresolved, usually unapologized for wounds in the relationship, again, touch the deeper, older, more primal wounds of our childhood. And it feels, again, like our lives are threatened, like we can't get over it, like we'll have obsessive thinking, we'll start to, we'll not sleep, we'll not eat. It's all the stuff you hear in love songs and poetry, right? It's because those unresolved issues in our relationships haunt us, because oftentimes the partner that we broke up with did not acknowledge their behavior, or didn't properly apologize for their behavior, or didn't take any responsibility for their part in the breakup. And in those unresolved issues in the relationship, all of our unresolved issues from good old mom and dad come back. So it leads us into this exploration of, okay, well, now what do we do? I had high hopes for this relationship. This relationship ended. I did my best to fight for it. And now I'm left with this, very deep pain or very deep longing. And now what do I do with it? Before we go down the road of what to do after a breakup, I think it's important to talk about how we break up, because you can learn a lot about yourself and about your partner by how you break up. And it's important to understand some people, when things end, will blame and villainize. Some people will self-reflect. Some people will do a little bit of both. I think most of us do a little bit of both. But it really is an important intention to set, that I want to honor and celebrate the love we had, even if it ended before I wanted it to end. And so I think a couple of things to consider in how you break up is, how can you guys be supportive to each other through the breakup? And I always like to think, when I'm coaching people who are going through breakups, I always like to set this standard. And the standard is, if you really loved this person, right? If you really cared about them, then it is your job to help them move into the next phase of their life. So sometimes that might mean, when I coach men about this, that might mean you help her find a place. You might help her financially. You might help her move. You might help her, land on her feet in some way. You might give a little more emotional support when, inside you're dying to tell her to fuck off. You do anything you can that will help her start her life over again. And of course, vice versa. This is true for any relationship. So the first question to ask is, how can I leave them better than I found them? How can I help them? If I truly love them, how can I help them move on to the next stage of their life, right? And it takes a very wide heart and a very mature and deep intention in order to literally help the person that just crushed your heart find a new place, right? I've had guys say, like, are you fucking kidding me? You're telling me to help her move? And I was like, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Like, you help her move. She needs money for rent, you help her pay rent. You literally help her if you really did love her, and it wasn't just about getting her to validate you through relationship, and you really did care, then you take the extra step and you do what will help her move on. Another way to engage in conscious uncoupling, let's call it, is for there to be a recognition where each partner gets to say what they need to say, both in terms of appreciations, in terms of resentments that are still there, in terms of regrets that they may have about how they showed up in the relationship, in terms of desires for how to relate in the future, whether to be friends or occasional lovers or whatever feels right. And so having a conscious uncoupling usually involves some ritual. And these kinds of ritual are about learning to let each other go. They're about learning to say goodbye in a way that is honoring and loving. I remember I went through a breakup a few months ago. It was a painful one. And I remember our therapist had us look into each other's eyes, sitting across from each other, and say goodbye 100 times. And I'll tell you, it was one of the deepest, most beautiful experiences I've ever had with a partner. So rituals like that, where you are literally saying goodbye to each other and you're honoring each other, you're thanking each other, you're appreciating each other, you're giving each other space to share any pains that are still unresolved. Because remember, you don't want your partner to be leaving the relationship not being heard. Like, so that the things that really bothered them and hurt them, if they leave the relationship without those things being heard and acknowledged, it's going to haunt them. And if you want to have a conscious uncoupling, you're going to have to hear those truths, the resentments that your partner still might have about how you did or did not fight for them, or about how you did or did not show up in the relationship, and honor them. And just, validate them, let them know that it makes sense that they're still resentful about that. And being able to clear resentments before you break up is a really beautiful and generous gift to give to each other. It's hard, I'm not going to lie, but it is a really beautiful gift. You might also want to share your regrets with your partner. This is where I wish I could have shown up for you more. This is where I wish I could have changed this behavior, or fought for us more, or been less reactive, or been more accepting, or cherished you more, or worked less, or any number of things, not used the kids as a means to stay separated. And so you being able to share your regrets with your partner also eases their heart, also eases their nervous system. And again, we're trying to allow our partners to leave the relationship without all sorts of unresolved, unheard problems and resentments. Another part of this ritual could be something like acknowledging the magic moments that you shared. As sad as that is sometimes, it's a really beautiful way to acknowledge the ways that your partner showed up for you, the ways your partner gave of themselves to you. And anytime you can share magic moments or praise or deep appreciation for your partner, it absolutely helps the relationship and the uncoupling go much smoother and be much less painful. Now, of course, there are some, it's impossible to have a very difficult breakup and not have, lingering feelings of dissatisfaction or blame or contempt or bitterness. I mean, those things are absolutely part of breaking up, and it's part of what I'll talk about in a few minutes, how we deal with this individually. But while you're still uncoupling, it's really important to create some kind of ritual, some kind of timeline, some practice that acknowledges your relationship, acknowledges where you might still have resentments, acknowledges what was beautiful in your relationship, and then sets them free. So let's say that you've just ended a relationship and you've done this kind of beautiful, conscious uncoupling ritual that I just described. And now you're in this phase of transitioning from being in each other's lives every day to not being in each other's lives hardly at all. So it's going to be important for you guys to agree on things like, how much do we want to stay in contact? Do we want to check in every week for a while? Do we want to just go cold turkey and not have any contact? And this sort of how this intentional and conscious co-creation of how to end things is very important, especially if you have children. Of course, if you have children, there's a lot of complexity to this, but I'm just really speaking on the human to human emotional level. How is it that you want to spend the next 3 months? Do you want to talk once? Do you want to have lunch once a month and then just check in? Do you want to be available for each other when the other person is hurting? Do you want to be able to listen to them and hear that they miss you? That's something that I've done in a recent breakup that was very helpful. It was very helpful for her and I agreed that, hey, when one of the other of us missed each other, we had the freedom to reach out and just share our missing, share our pain, and the other held it really beautifully. So that's also a way that you can co-create, right? You can literally make up the most loving, conscious, generous way to break up. This is something that a lot of people miss, right? They think that, oh, just because we're ending, I want to move on, get them out of my life, et cetera, et cetera. But especially in the first 90 days after leaving, it's a shock to the system. It's almost like you've lost your family again for many people. And so being able to have some kind of consistency around contact, some kind of open communication, some way to be generous with each other's hearts is also a very, very helpful way to transition. And then we are stuck in this space of asking our partners to do something that they just can't do. And that is often the reason why relationships will end. All right, so let's say that your relationship has ended. You ended it as consciously and generously and lovingly as you could. And you are now in this space of you're back with yourself. And you're in this space of deep reflection about what happened. And sometimes over the course of months after a relationship ends, it's a good idea to do a bit of a post-mortem with your partner. Sometimes that's possible. Most of the time, there needs to be a good chunk of space before that can happen. So the space after you've separated from your partner, you've helped them transition into a new life, you've as gently as you could, let them down and helped them back into a new start in life. Now it's time to turn the focus to yourself. Now it's time to look at what wounds were kicked up in this relationship that are now screaming to be looked at. So for example, if your partner broke up with you, rejected you, for example, abandoned you, whatever words you want to use, but ended the relationship when you did not want the relationship to end, and you have abandonment or rejection wounds in your system from your childhood, your parents weren't super present, or maybe your dad left when you were young, or any number of things, that are your deep abandonment and neglect wounds, then your partner's leaving is, of course, going to trigger those wounds, going to trigger that deep, often pre-verbal and sometimes even in utero wounds. So now you have a really beautiful opportunity to take the pain that's coming from your now ended tragic relationship and go deep into the wounds that you may or may not have fully felt. And this will often require some therapeutic support. There's all kinds of really beautiful spaces like Hoffman Institute. There's a lot of really beautiful therapists that will help guide you back into the traumas of your childhood and where you were neglected or where you were abandoned, where you were rejected, and really help you get into why this is so painful, right? Why this 2-year relationship has literally debilitated you for 6 months, right? It's not the relationship that's doing all the debilitating. It's not your partner that left, even though it's very easy to blame them. It's pulling on the string of a deeper, older wound that you now have the capacity to take a look at. So one of the first things that I always recommend people do after a relationship ends is take a break. Don't just go back into dating, take 3 months or 6 months, sometimes even longer off so that you can really feel what the fuck just happened, right? How did this love go wrong? Where did my childhood wounds sabotage this relationship? Where did my, rejection wounds or neglect wounds or withdrawal wounds make me a difficult partner? Where did my avoidance? Maybe you have an attachment style that you haven't looked at. Maybe you are anxious or you are avoidant, and that became an impediment in the relationship. So having some space after a relationship ends and after you've, found a way to generously separate from your partner, it's now time to look at yourself and start asking these questions. What are the wounds that I need to deal with? What are the pathologies maybe that I brought into that relationship? Was I practicing certain addictions in the relationship? Was I bringing certain attachment styles to the relationship that made it very difficult for the relationship to succeed? Is there some very deep form of trauma that was triggered by my partner that I refused to look at? And now they're gone. So now I can actually take a step into it and really look at these wounds. And what I've seen, both in myself and in many couples that I've worked with and many people that I've sort of helped through conscious separations, what I've seen is that it's in the diving into these original wounds that true transformation happens, and that we get to attract new partners from a more healed place within ourselves. One of the great mistakes I see people make after breakups is that they tend to fall into this belief that it was just the wrong partner. They tend to fall in this belief that, if their partner was just different, or if it was somebody else, or there's somebody else out there. And like I said earlier, that is rarely the case, because our patterns will follow us. No matter how perfect our next partner is, they will fall into the patterns that we bring to the relationship. So it is really unproductive to just look at your partner and go, oh, well, the next one will be different. The next one will be better, because chances are they won't. Chances are things will repeat. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it was just, somebody else is much better suited to you. But more often than not, there is a need to deeply reflect. And one of the ways, like I said, is to reflect on the wounds that are now active because of the relationship. You might dive into the relationship itself and take a look at where your anger got triggered and what wound that is attached to. Where did your avoidance or withdrawal get triggered, and what wounds are that attached to? Where your addictions got triggered, or your lying, dishonesty got triggered, or where your selfishness got triggered, and what wounds are that attached to. So there is a process that I take many of my long-term groups through. I'm going to give you an abbreviated version of it here, but it is meant to be a very deep inventory of your part in the relationship ending. And also you can, track this back over multiple relationships and really start to see the patterns that you've brought into not just your your current relationship or most previous relationship, but all of your relationships, because these patterns tend to repeat, as I've said. So we call this the masculine and feminine reconciliation. And we really try to frame it from this place of, a lot of different, kind of including everything that I'm talking about here. And there are questions on it like, where did you withhold your devotional energy? Where might you have castrated or punished your masculine partner for perceived or real wrongs? Where did you withdraw and refuse to repair or create safety in the relationship? Where did you not cherish her heart? Where did you abdicate leadership and expect her to lead the household and lead everything in the relationship? Where might you have pushed away their attempts at loving you? Where did you make it very difficult for them to give the gifts that they were trying to give? Where did you ignore your pathologies, things you knew were active in past relationships, and when they came up in this relationship, where might you have ignored it and just, once again, made it their fault? So there are a number of questions in the reconciliations that I think are really helpful in getting you the information that's kind of like a roadmap of what you need to work on in yourself so that you don't repeat these in, the future relationships that you have high hopes for. And so there's a link in the, we have a link in the description, the show notes below, and that'll take you down to the Embodied Relationship Experience platform. And there you can get the feminine and masculine reconciliation format. It's a deep dive. I won't lie. It's a deep dive into how to reset your relationship with the masculine or the feminine as you see fit, right? Based on taking a really hard look at all of the ways that you did or did not show up in the relationship. A final piece of reflection that I want to give about relationships that survive versus relationships that don't At some point, we become devotional to our partner's nervous system over our own protective mechanisms. And when we fail to do that, our relationships will become unstable. So if my devotion is to beautifully activate, soothe, nourish my partner's nervous system, whether we're in conflict or just having a mundane day, if my devotion, if my intention is about soothing their nervous system, about activating and enlivening their nervous system, above and beyond the other things that I have to do in the day, above and beyond being right in a conflict, above and beyond, whatever my hurt feelings are in that moment. If my devotion is to their nervous system, then I am being devotional to loving them. And when I see relationships end, it's usually because people are just kicking each other's ass nervous system wise. They are lighting each other's nervous system up with contempt. They're lighting each other's nervous system up with a lack of presence, with a lack of open-heartedness, with complaint, with criticism, which is basically just like poking their nervous system with a little knife, with a little shiv. And so if you are in a relationship that might be rocky, right? Or you're in a relationship that may have just ended, you can ask yourself this question of like, how devotional was I to their nervous system? Right? Maybe I wasn't perfect in the moment, but how quickly did I try to come back and repair with them? How quickly did I take a look at what their nervous system needed in order to feel safe? And again, you might not be able to meet their nervous system needs. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes your capacity is just not to the level of what they really need. But are you trying? Is that your intention? Are you really committed to soothing, relaxing, down-regulating your partner's nervous system so that your relationship space is a safe place for them? From there, virtually anything is possible. And when I see couples going through conflict, no matter how intensely triggering the conflict is, when their devotion is to soothing each other's nervous system, grounding each other, letting each other know, hey, we're on the same team. Hey, I'm not going anywhere. Hey, I love you. I'm here. We're going to work this out. Like all of those things are ways that that people can soothe each other's nervous system. And I think I'll do a podcast just on that, right? Just on how to take care of your partner's nervous system during conflict, because it is, to me, the biggest problem that I see and the biggest reason why I think relationships end over time. And a note, if you're entering into a new relationship or you're in a relationship that's going really well and there's just, maybe a couple cracks, in the container, something to consider is to take a look at these questions that are in the masculine and feminine reconciliation and start applying them right away. Start applying this idea of being a healing and soothing agent for your partner's nervous system. Try and take a look at where you may be withholding your truths and then getting resentful, or where you might not be setting boundaries and then getting resentful, or where you are, unable to ask for the things that you need, or you're willing to meet a partner's need, but you just can't seem to make your nervous system and your body do it when the time comes. All of those things, having open lines of communication, having an intention to really take a look at what you are bringing to the dance. I think the most important thing I would love for you to get from this podcast is to keep the focus on you. To keep the focus on what's happening in you, because most of the time our partners are not meaning to hurt us. Of course, there are, narcissists out there and there are assholes out there and there are people that are selfish out there, right? We're all narcissistic, selfish assholes at some level, right? But what's important is that we focus on ourselves and how what they're doing is impacting us emotionally. And then we take radical responsibility for the healing of ourselves. And then in doing that, we are actually helping to relax and heal their nervous systems. So the, final thought on this podcast is no matter where you are in your relationship journey, and no matter what conflicts that you may come up against, to really keep the focus on what it is evoking in you versus what they are doing. Now, of course, if there are, inappropriate behaviors and boundaries that need to be set, of course, those can be stated. But again, if you don't change the way that your nervous system and body reacts to them, right, and how that stemmed long before you met them, right, the origins of our reactivity, of our addictive behaviors, of our pathologies, all of those origins started way before you met your partner. And so just recognizing that the mommy wound and the daddy wound, which seem to be coming up a lot these days, predate your partner and you meeting. And so if you want to really have not just a healthy relationship, but a thriving and healing relationship, one that actually heals each other, then these kinds of explorations are needed. All right. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Embodied Relationship Experience.